Hello. We should be getting started with the game here in just a few minutes. So this will be technically our 4th session of Apothecaria, week 6 in game. Hope everybody is doing well. Hello. How are you doing, Newt? So I am doing something just slightly different. Started to add, so in the previous journal entries over the last few weeks, I have been, kind of avoiding dialogue because they're supposed to be like journal entries from Marcius. I've started kind of adding some of that in, still kind of sparingly, but I think it will kind of help the flow of things. And, I mean, when I used to keep a journal or diary, I used to put down what people had said to me, so I don't think it's too far out of base. Yeah, I bet you are exhausted. I hope you get some good sleep tonight before you have to work tomorrow, Newt. I am pretty worn out myself, but you were up super late. Yeah. So, last week, during our game, we came across Emerius the Druid again, and spent some time with them, and we also came across Maro, who was the elfin person we came across at the Ruined Stone, like the first or second week. Only this time he was sitting upon a throne in the ruins out in the forest, and he told us the story about the snake, the rose, and the raven. And then we helped cure Siobhan, who was one of the shepherds in the town, of Yeti Chest, and got to have a dinner with Siobhan and their partner. And we didn't. So we had been hoping to find some more clues about the witch, but we didn't end up doing so. The location on the map ended up taking us to those ruins where Maro was. So yeah, we will be starting from there. Alright, so we should be all set up. Perfect. And then at the end of last week, let's take a look here. Our inventory, we had smooth croak, that fossil fish still, moon lotus, and the golden guppy. And we still have briar, of course. And then on our reputation, we are up to reputation level 8, and we have 85 silver now. And so we were going to take a look to see what we wanted to buy. So we do take a look at that this week. And yeah, I guess we can get going. Hello, Dennis. Are you making yourself known to everybody? Do you want to come be on camera? Come here. Come on. Dennis. Hi. What are you doing? Other than trying to destroy everything. Other than trying to destroy the world, buddy. Whoa, you're knocking everything over. Everything you can. Who are you? Huh? You gonna go up? Okay. April 24th, 6th week of spring. I took stock of what I had saved from the last few weeks. I'd tucked away the silver I'd made so far to assess if there were any tools I found myself needing. I had seen that a shop called Bits and Bobs had some tools available. Others I may have to hope that a traveling vendor like Marie comes back through town if I want to get them. I glanced up while I was working on the books and saw the guppy and fossil fish in their cramped little bowls. I could tell that neither would last much longer, but my 80 silver wouldn't be enough for a proper tank for them. It would take at least a few more clients if I had to hope to save up enough for something like that. I sighed as I realized it would be best if I harvested what I could be used from them, rather than drag it out in an attempt to wait until I could. I spent the morning harvesting what I could from both. Apologies were given that I hadn't just done so to begin with, so that they didn't have to float in their inappropriately sized confinement. The fossil fish hardly seemed to notice its end, though the guppy I had to take care not to get poisoned in the process. Still, I ended up with a jar of dried fossil fish scales and a small bottle of the golden scale guppy's poison. Neither fish were ones known to be edible, though I still wrapped them up and stored them in the icebox to use as bait, if I needed to fish up anything else, perhaps something more edible. I had managed to clean up from the task. The thought of whether I should try to purchase something small now, or save up for something more expensive later, when I heard the telltale knock on my door. It seems that I'd gained myself a decent enough reputation here for more people to come to me for help. Alright, sounds good, Newt. You have a good night, hon. Card drawn for the suit for the patient was a clubs, and the card drawn for the ailment is 6. It wasn't a part of the ailment this time when I opened the door and found my patient had fur-covered legs. I felt confused at first, and then annoyed as I recognized the fawn. What he was doing in High Rannoc was beyond me, as the last time I had seen him had been almost a year ago, when I had been traveling through a region known as the Malatine Meadows. The first words out of his mouth, lips unusually warty, were, "I can't explain." I stepped away from the door, while leaving it open for him to follow me inside without a word. He took the unspoken invitation, close on my heels, as he stated he'd heard a rumor I had taken up residence here, and, since we were already old friends, then it made sense to come to me for his affliction. "You're lucky I already have the smooth croak on hand. I'll just have to get something to help draw out the poison," I said, as I gathered my things. I preferred to get this dealt with, though I hardly believed for a moment that I would get Sig out of my hair. I told him to stay at the house until I returned, as I met his gaze and found him pouting at me. Or perhaps it was because his lips were currently swollen with the warts. Either way, it was his own fault. "You're not still mad, are you?" I turned and walked out the door. I heard him shout something after me, but I ignored it as I started on my way. Briar stood a little ways off the path and stared at the house as I passed. I told her to make sure he didn't steal anything. Or die, I suppose. High Rannoc, case number 6, Sig, annoyance. Some suffering with frogified can be treated with reagents that treat warts and poison. Heroes Hollow. I practically marched to Heroes Hollow as I felt my frustration pound in my ears. It was a relief in some ways to see Sig again. He'd always been a bit accident-prone, so it was good to see that he still managed to be alive. That didn't shake off the anger I had at him, though. How could he think I would still not be angry? He had left. Not only that, but he had left knowing it had put me indirectly in the path of trouble. But leaving was the biggest offense, in my opinion. I reached Heroes Hollow faster than I thought I would, as I found myself suddenly staring down the large skull that doubled as the entrance. I sighed, knew I needed to focus more on the task at hand as I went into the dungeon. It wouldn't have done any good to get so caught up in my frustration that I ended up in a bad situation down there. Event card drawn is a 4. I tried to keep my focus on here and now as I moved into the dry upper passages. I would have to make my way deeper again, like I had last time, towards where the snails would be, if not even a bit further, as I was looking for a type of fungus that would prefer the dark and dank regions of Heroes Hollow. I couldn't completely blame Sig for back then. Things hadn't been great for either of us, and him leaving may have saved me some trouble, just as much as it had caused it. It was the hurt of how he left that still lingered, though. The Dungeness ruins were quiet today. No sobbing would-be adventurers down here this time, apparently. Not that I came across, at least, even as I found the first telltale slime trail of the hermit snails. I cast a light out to better see what was around. A small, dim orb that gave me just enough vision to tell where I was going and that nothing lurked in my immediate vicinity. My eyes had adjusted to the dark after a while of heading deeper inside. I hoped I would see the skull-like shape of the skull-cap shrooms soon so I could gather them and leave. Not that I felt in much of a hurry to get back to Sig, either, though there was a part of me that wondered if I would get an explanation. I rounded a corner and was momentarily blinded by firelight that lit up a corner of a small cavern within the tunnel system. I backed away at first, fear gripped at the thought I'd just come across some unexpected danger. Something grabbed my hand as a chittering rose up somewhere near my knees, and I pulled away. I stumbled as I did, fell back, and hit the floor in a way that bruised my tailbone. As my eyes adjusted to the new, brighter light, I made out the small, fuzzy shape that had apparently been the thing that grabbed my hand. It looked a bit contrite at me falling, and stood staring wide-eyed as though waiting for some reaction. I shifted to stand as I looked behind it to find what looked like one of the stalls I would have expected in the town center, set up behind it in the corner. Torches lit up the area around the stall that held an assortment of items. I asked if it was selling something, uncertain if it would even understand me or not. and it lit up with a toothy smile at the mention as it rushed forward to take my hand once more. I let it lead me this time as it pulled me along to the stall. I was met with an assortment of items that looked as though they were likely items that had been lost or abandoned inside the hollow in the past. There were some rings and a few rusted swords that likely couldn't do much at this point. I watched the small creature move to stand behind its stall, and it gave me another toothy grin before gesturing at everything laid out before it. I got the gist that it wanted to sell me something, or maybe trade something. I looked down at the items and lined up in front of me once more, not certain I'd find anything of interest. I did worry a little, though, with just how sharp those teeth looked to be, that a disappointed vendor would spell some trouble for me. I spotted among the items on the table a protection ring, made of silver, with a small sapphire set within the center of two cupped hands as its centerpiece, and I picked it up carefully. I could feel the original spell on it had faded some, but there was still a lingering hint of it there. I would easily be able to re-imbue it, pull on that old magic to reinvigorate it some. I held it up to the small vendor and asked how much it would sell for. It didn't seem to understand this, as it just held its hand out, clearly expecting something in exchange, though what, it wasn't clear. I had a feeling this was likely more of a trade situation, as I was fairly certain it wouldn't have much use for the silver down here. I took a moment to look through my things. I hadn't taken the time to really plan for something like this, given my desire to simply get away from Sieg showed up. I had little on me again, but as I moved, I realized that its eyes were following the chain on my glasses. It was an ornate chain, something some friend or another in the past gotten for me on a whim out of annoyance of me misplacing my glasses, and it had small rounded gems of glass inlaid in between the links. I reached to touch it and saw the little creature's face light up at my apparent understanding. I took my glasses off so I could carefully unhook the chain. I was hesitant to give it away. I'd had it for so long, and though it hadn't been a sentimental gift, it was still something I'd looked fondly at over the years. I slipped it loose, though, and dangled it over the creature's hands as it stared in awe and wonder. It seemed to think it was something wondrous as it watched the firelight catch the little glass gems. I lowered it into its hands, and it gave a happy sort of chirp as it hugged it close. I slipped the ring on my finger and said goodbye, that it returned in a distracted manner as it dangled the chain to watch the glass in the firelight once more. I cast my light out as I stepped back into the darkness of the tunnels, away from the creature's small makeshift shop of lost items. I only had to search for a short while longer before finding the little skull-shaped heads of the mushrooms I needed. I gathered them, eyes lingering from time to time on the ring as I tried to feel out just how old the magic on it was. I admit, I took a little longer to gather what I needed than was absolutely necessary, delaying my turn to the house to face Sieg as long as I could justify without pitting him at some risk. If he had to deal with the painful warts and a little bit of poisoning for a while longer, it served him right, as it was. I'd love to hear his reason for being out kissing toads in the first place. That was the only way he likely would have gotten frogified in the first place. The trip back home was far less fired up than my walk out to the hollow had been. I passed Briar once more as I approached the house, and she seemed to have not moved. She was simply watching Sieg, who was now sitting on my front porch, looking worried as he waited for me. I shooed him away again when he saw I'd returned, moved inside so I could get the potion made and be done with this. Amphibious nullification. Ingredients: skull cap times 2 crushed, smooth croak times 1 boiled. Step 1. Take smooth croak slime and place inside the cauldron. Add half a cup of water to dilute slightly and then heat to a boil. Caution: boiling smooth croak is wont to splatter and burn. Cover cauldron when heating. Step 2. Take skull caps and remove the stems. Place the caps into your mortar and crush them with the pestle until they form a thick paste. Step 3. Once smooth croak has started to boil, remove from heat immediately and add crushed skull cap paste to the mixture. Stir vigorously to fully incorporate. Step 4. Let mixture cool slightly until tolerable to the touch. Apply to the afflicted's lips and anywhere else wars have started to spread to treat the lesions. Step 5. Add remaining mixture to a hot cup of water and stir. Have afflicted drink this mixture to help counteract any digested poison as well. I went out and sat outside as Sieg applied the salve to his lips. When he eventually came to join me, I offered him a cup of water, mixed with the remainder of the concoction to drink. The evening was setting in, and the night was full of the sounds of crickets and whatever other small creatures scurried about. Briar had wandered closer to the house as the sun got low in the sky. I watched her as we sat in silence, punctuated by the sounds of Sieg trying to slurp down the concoction with clear distaste. "Still mad, then?" he spoke up after a while, apparently unable to stay in the silence. "Never got the chance to be properly mad at you previously, so yes, I'm still mad," I responded to him, though I couldn't draw on enough energy to put any real spite behind it. He made a quiet sound of affirmation at this, and I rolled my eyes out of annoyance. "You lost your glasses chain?" "I traded it. I didn't lose it." I said it, but I could feel that sort of naked feeling drawing its way out the longer I went without the chain hanging familiarly around my neck. The ring sat on my finger, though, just as much of a signal of the trade, as it made me feel hyper-aware of my hand. I knew at some point it would switch. The ring would be that old familiar feeling, and the glasses chain would either be replaced or fade away from my immediate consciousness. We sat for a while again, the sun sinking below the horizon entirely this time, to leave only the lights from inside the house shining out through the windows to illuminate us. "I understand why you left, you know, but you could have said something, anything to me before you just disappeared." I spoke this time, quiet to match the night, and I heard Sieg shift beside me in his chair. "You're right. Felt like enough of a coward for leaving, though. Couldn't stomach the idea of facing you to tell you back then." I scoffed quietly, watched Briar as she bedded down for the night in her favorite spot of grass just off the side of the overgrown garden plot. "You called on a new familiar, then?" "You can stay the night if you need to. I've got a spare bed in the back, though. Don't complain if it's a bit dusty. You should probably head out in the morning." I stood up from my chair to turn and head inside, ignored the question that Sieg clearly could already see the answer to. He caught my hand as I pushed the door to open it, held it for a second before letting go when I didn't respond. "Good night, then," I heard him say quietly as I headed inside. With that, we will earn the 20 silver for curing, 1 point of reputation, and we will also lose the smooth croak now that it's been used to make the potion. April 26th. Sieg is still here. We move around each other as if we're afraid that pointing out the obvious will make the other suddenly realize it. I had found him the next morning after I'd made his cure out in the garden with Briar. He always had been fond of gardening, and he'd worked over the last couple of days to clear out the plot and till the soil. I haven't asked him why he stayed, and he hasn't asked why I've let him. I decided after all that I wanted to try and get something with the silver that I have saved up. A sickle, if I can find one suitable for the task. It would help with my foraging, and if I am to have a steady stream of patients to treat, it would do me some good. Sieg asked where I was headed when I started off towards town in the early evening, and when I told him, he decided to follow. I wondered how the people of High Rannoc would react to a fawn wandering into town behind me. I hadn't seen many fey creatures aside from Emrys and Genemee, which since I arrived here, and neither appeared to interact with the townsfolk much. When we arrived in town, though, no one seemed to bat an eye at him, aside from some of the younger town's kids. I've started to feel less and less like the people of High Rannoc could be the reason behind the previous witch's disappearance, and this seemed to be some further proof that they didn't hold some of those lingering, outdated grudges you could sometimes find in other regions. Event card drawn is a Jack. For his part, Sieg played the role of charmer just as good as always. I introduced him to Damien and his mother Sally, and within minutes he had Sally giggling and blushing like a young maid. I gave Damien an apologetic look before asking how he'd been. I wanted to make sure there had been no sign of his metallic thumb returning, and he gave me every reassurance that it wasn't. I told him about my goal of getting a sickle to use during my foraging, as Sieg told a mildly waunchy anecdote off to the side that made Sally break out into laughter again. You should be able to get one from Alex. Tell him I sent you, though he's unlikely to cut you any sort of deal. He's a bit of a stickler. Once you're done, you should stop by the moon tower. I heard the doc talking about how it's some convergence or something that makes it good for tuning equipment. Damien pointed to direct my attention towards the south side of town, where the roof of the tower was just visible above the other buildings. I thanked him for the information, making note of where the tower's position was before I pulled Sieg away from Sally. Damien seemed relieved that I was taking him with me as we started through the market again. Sieg didn't mean anything with his flirting. He never did. It was his way of being friendly, but it landed him in trouble more often than not. They seem nice, he exclaimed as we made our way through the town center past the fountain, where Sean and his group of friends were sitting and talking loudly as ever. I was relieved to see the friend who'd been brought to me a few weeks back sitting with them, looking far healthier than he had previously. I groaned quietly when Sean noticed me and suddenly excused himself from his friends to try and catch up. A friend of yours? Sieg asked, as I tried to pick up the pace to avoid Sean. Hardly, I muttered, just before I felt the arm go over my shoulder as Sean caught up and fell in step with us. He loudly exclaimed how good it was to see me as if we were old friends, and thanked me for taking good care of his friend when he had drunk too much the other week. I tried to dodge out from underneath his arm as we walked, but Sean just moved with me when I did. Glad to see the vampire has stayed away. Now, how about you? Get lost in any dungeons lately, Sean? I said in return a little louder than I would normally. It seemed that Sean was trying to make sure I hadn't told anyone about his friend's affliction, but though I didn't make a point of telling others of what I treated someone for, I wasn't above making it clear I wouldn't hesitate to warn others if danger was still around. Sean laughed, tried to play off both comments as a joke, though I could tell by the weight of his arm that he didn't appreciate me bringing up either subject. His laughter drew more attention than my comment had, though, and a few vendors glanced our way as he passed. Sieg watched for a few moments silently. I knew he was taking in the dynamic going on in the conversation, and then he grinned at Sean as he moved to shake his hand and, by doing so, get shot between Sean and me. "You must be one of the brave adventurers from these parts. It's grand to meet you," Sieg exclaimed in a welcoming tone, as Sean seemed confused by the intrusion. I stopped along with them, relieved to have Sean's arm off from around my shoulders, but a bit worried how the two of them would interact. Sieg tried to motion for me to go ahead, but like hell I would leave him to get in trouble after he'd followed me into town. "What, did you get yourself a pet?" Sean asked me once he seemed to get his bearings, and I felt myself bristle at the obvious insult towards Sieg. Before I could say or do anything, though, Sieg squeezed Sean's hand a little tighter as his smile sharpened. "Sean, right. Always good to know a man's name," Sieg said pointedly. After Sean laughed at first, it seemed to set in on him what was being said. He pulled his hand away from Sieg, whose smile seemed more genuine and friendly again. "I didn't mean anything by it. I was just joking," Sean stammered a little, reminding me of when I'd first met him in the dungeons as he glanced between us, before he turned to walk away back towards his friends who watched from the fountain. "You shouldn't have done that," I said to Sieg under my breath, though I couldn't quite contain a bit of a laugh as we started back towards the blacksmith's shop once more. I am stumbling over my words. It's good for some young people to get a bit of fear put in them. Besides, knowing the asshole's name doesn't actually give me any benefit aside from knowing who to avoid. Sieg agreed and bumped my arm lightly and shared amusement. For a moment, things felt like they had been a long while back. Just for a moment, though. The blacksmith was empty outside where the anvil and workbench sat, but the door was propped open slightly to go inside. I pulled the door open as we reached it, Sieg already distracted again by a vendor who had an array of fruit for sale. He trailed off towards the stand without a thought, and I found myself remembering that this wasn't back then. Sieg would likely leave in a few days, and I'd be on my own again. Well, not on my own. Not now that I had Briar. The blacksmith, Alec, greeted me as I came inside. He was a gruff-looking man, what you would think of when you pictured a blacksmith. He smiled warmly, though, in greeting, and I wondered if Damien was perhaps being facetious when he stated that Alec was a stickler. I mentioned that Damien had directed me to come here as I was looking for a sickle, and Alec quickly produced an array of options. I looked them over, admired the workmanship on them all, as Alec seemed fond of adding small embellishments to the sides of even the sickle blades. He had swords around the shop that equally had small designs and embellishments that made them each unique. I settled on one then, and didn't feel the need to even try asking for some sort of deal. His workmanship deserved every silver from what I could tell, and this was specifically the sort of thing I had saved my silver for. We made our exchange, and I thanked Alec before stepping back outside. We now have the sickle. In our inventory, and then we have lost 50 silver for that, so we are down to 55. I scanned the crowd in the dimming light as lights were lit around the town square to prolong the evening as people still made their purchases. I spotted the stall that had the fruit that pulled Sieg in, and found that he was still there with a small group of nearby vendors standing with him, as he told them some tale or another. I thought of getting his attention to head back towards the moon tower with me, but decided to leave it. He could find his way back to the house later if he chose to. I don't know how long he intended to stay, and he was always more in his element when surrounded by people he could entertain. I started down the town street and headed towards where I'd seen the roof of the moon tower. I cast my own light after a bit, just for a little more illuminations to my surroundings, along with the glow of the mage flames that illuminated the streets. If there were mages in town, I hadn't met them yet, but I had a feeling that the dock Damien had mentioned was likely one. Mages are a little different than witches. For a witch, magic comes naturally, if not always easily. They could use tools to strengthen their magic or more finely tune it, but they didn't need it necessarily. For mages, they had to find ways to tune into it, often through runes and crystals, as they absorbed the magic in the environment around everything. Without their tools, mages wouldn't be able to work their form of magic. When the tower came into view, it wasn't as tall as one would expect something called a tower would be. Still, it was a good story or two taller than the other buildings in the area, and around the entire circular wall of the building were stained glass windows that had crystal embedded within them that sparkled with glowing light that matched that of the moon that had risen on the horizon. I found the door that led inside and chose to knock before entering. I wasn't certain what the etiquette observed here was, and I didn't wish to make a bad first impression if a mage did watch over the tower. I stood for several long moments and had raised my hand to knock again when the door suddenly opened. I was met with the face of a man, maybe a little older than I am, with round glasses and hair so blonde it appeared silver in the dark. He stared at me for a few seconds, seeming to take in my appearance before he pushed the door open the rest of the way. "You're the witch." He didn't say it as a question, but just gestured for me to step inside. "I am," I said in response, though there seemed to be no need for one as I stepped through the doorway. The tower was lit up inside, crystals hanging from the ceiling down along the height of the tower at various lengths, setting off fractals of moonlight and mage light combined. The top of the tower was open to the sky. The roof somehow seemed to be opened up like a door to the heavens. The man closed the door behind him to move over to a table where he had more crystals lying there. I stood awkwardly to the side for a few moments, uncertain if he expected something of me or if I was simply allowed to set up to tune to my new sickle, given the fortune of it being a convergence. "It's good you're here. I can help with most regular ailments, but as you know, making potions is a specialty that mages rarely exceed at, given the need to keep the magic balance in check while brewing them. You can set up over there. I just need to hang some more crystals before the convergence hits. It is the best time to try and tune them all." He glanced back at me as he spoke, though most of his focus stayed on his task at hand. He pointed me towards a small desk that was covered by scattered papers for me to use if I needed to, and I took care not to disturb too much as I took out the sickle and my new ring. I do both at once, attune the sickle to help for a short while foraging, and get my ring's protection spell renewed. "Thank you for allowing me to work here. It always helps to have the aid of a place like this." I spoke up after a few moments as I finished my preparations and watched him carefully string up the last few crystals. He gave a small grunt of acknowledgement, clearly a man of few words, though I almost appreciated the quiet. Once we'd both finished setting up, he pulled a couple of chairs over into the center of the large room and motioned for me to sit beside him. I did, looking up at the open-topped roof, where the moon was starting to slide into view. I appreciate that you've come and that you're trying to figure out what happened to Leary. It was a shame when she went missing. He spoke with that same matter-of-fact manner, and I stared at him for a long moment before the threads connected. Leary, was that her name? I asked, trying to think if I'd seen that scrawled down somewhere before. No, not her real name at least, but what she went by most often here. He shook his head lightly, and I smiled a bit at the explanation. Of course, she would have had some sort of alias. Most witches do. I did. Oh, most witches did. I do. Still, it was nice to have a little something to hold on to. I looked up as the room suddenly lit up brilliantly. The circular hole in the roof was filled with the face of the moon, and the crystals that were hung amplified its glow until the tower was almost blinding, filled with its light. The next few moments were spent attuning the sickle and drawing out the old protection spell on the ring to renew and amplify it. I heard my companion working to ensure the crystals all absorbed their share of moon glow until the moment eventually passed. It seemed to last longer than would seem natural, but that was simply the nature of these places. Often built on ley lines to draw in the most power they could in those lingering moments, and it could feel as though time slowed when a convergence hit. As the moon moved on, I gathered my things, and then helped him lower the crystals. My name is Marcius. I stated it as I lingered once everything was done, realizing we hadn't truly introduced ourselves. Call him. It would be nice if you came by again, perhaps when I am less busy. He paused long enough to look at me and give a small attempt at a smile. He seemed suddenly self-conscious, but I nodded at him in return with understanding. I'll do that. Have a good night, Caleb. Night, he waved, though his attention was already back on his work. I let myself out of the tower, sickle tucked away in my satchel, and ring back on my hand, where I could feel its renewed thrum of magic. I had made my way down the steps before Sieg spoke up from behind me, where he'd apparently been waiting by the door. Could have told me you were heading here. Had to ask your friend Damien. I thought maybe you had hoped to shake me loose of you. I paused long enough for him to fall in step beside me before we started down the road back towards the town's center. You seemed content with your audience. I didn't say that I had somewhat expected Sieg would take it as a sign he could leave if he wanted. I haven't been able to shake the sense he only remained because he felt bad for leaving before. There was no other reason for him to have stayed these last few days. They were a good audience, but Sieg trailed off. Whatever he'd been thinking of saying left for the fates alone to know. So, you get what you needed done back there. I did. You find anything you wanted in the market? The town was quieting down around us as we went, people tucking themselves in for the night. I spotted Damien as he helped his mother close up their stand as we passed back through the town center and gave him a wave goodnight. Nah, I've got what I need for now. We ate a late dinner, some leftover stew when we got back to the house. I laid awake for a while, wondering about Leary, and about Colin, and about Sieg waiting for me in the dark, outside the moon tower. Marcius. Alright, so that is where we wrap up for this session. So yes, we end with losing that smooth croak reagent since we used it up, but we now have the sickle, which is a permanent item in our inventory. And then our reputation is now up to 9. So if our reputation goes up one more to where it reaches 10, that means we can move up into the next step of ailments. So we've been working in novice. I believe the next step is intermediate. So they start getting more difficult after that. But we also start earning a little bit more silver with each. Since we bought the sickle, we went down, but we still have 55 silver left. And yeah, that is where we're ending. Thank you to anybody who stopped by. I appreciate it. Again, this will be up on my YouTube probably next week. The previous episodes are up there now. And I hope you all have a good night. Thank you, guys.